Sometimes, waiting is nothing less than a death sentence. Ukraine refuses to wait. They've launched a deep counterattack into Russian territory, leaving the world stunned by a bold strategy that shattered all expectations. This is not merely a reckless move. It's Ukraine's declaration. They are not fighting to survive. They are fighting to win. While Western leaders hesitated in debates, Ukraine seized the moment, flipping the rules of the game to their advantage. But could this move force Putin into a position where he has no choice but to retaliate? Let's explore how Ukraine's daring counteroffensive may shift the course of the war against Russia. Ukraine's reverse invasion into Russian territory marks a dramatic turning point, far removed from the grim outlook just 6 months ago. In February, Ukraine faced the potential fall of Avdiivka, making the prospect of victory seem distant. However, defeat was never a certainty. Despite severe shortages of ammunition, particularly 155mm artillery, and lacking air defense systems like the Patriot missile or electronic jamming technologies, Ukraine inflicted devastating losses on Russia, with Russian casualties reaching 47,000 soldiers. In a war where every advantage seemed to lie with the opponent, Ukraine has made it clear that they will not be subdued. Ukraine is facing strict limitations from its Western partners, who initially insisted that the weapons provided to Ukraine should not be used to attack Russian territory. Their goal was to prevent a wider conflict, keeping the war confined within Ukraine's borders. However, many experts, such as General Jack Keane, warn that a victory based solely on pushing Russia out of Ukraine will not be sufficient, as it may encourage future aggression. To win, Ukraine needs more than just defensive weapons. They need long-range weaponry and superior military resources to counter Russia's vast forces. Restricting Ukraine's ability to strike raises concerns about a prolonged war of attrition, which favors Russia. Time has proven that a divided approach to warfare is ineffective, forcing Western leaders to reconsider the restrictions they've imposed on Ukraine. The initial optimism from the 2022 counteroffensives has gradually faded, as the weapons supplied to Ukraine have not been enough to secure a decisive victory against Russia. Unfortunately for Ukraine, their warnings have not been fully heeded. Although the West broke some barriers by providing tanks and F-16 fighter jets in 2023, restrictions on the use of weapons and delays in delivering ammunition have given Russia time to reinforce its forces. When Avdiivka fell in February, it served as a wake-up call that the West's limitations were disadvantaging not only Ukraine, but also their own interests. French President Emmanuel Macron was one of the first leaders to call for a change in thinking, emphasizing that the West had gradually lifted the taboo on long-range weapons and fighter jets, but more needed to be done, possibly even deploying NATO troops to Ukraine. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen also made headlines by announcing that Denmark would send its entire artillery stock to Ukraine, despite concerns about depleting its own defense resources. These decisions stand in contrast to the earlier cautious idea that providing too much military aid to Ukraine could weaken the security of Western nations themselves. Western defense reserves need to be preserved, as missiles are expensive, supply chains are complex, and artillery is scarce due to stalled production after the Cold War. However, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen firmly asserts that the West is not the one in immediate danger. According to her, defeating Russia and Ukraine now would be better than allowing Putin to win, which would place an even greater burden on NATO's arsenal in the future. Frederiksen's argument seems to have been persuasive, as Western military aid has significantly increased since early 2024. This has given Ukraine an advantage in its war of attrition against Russia. Russian casualty rates have skyrocketed, with 70,000 killed and wounded between May and July alone, the highest number since the war began. However, for Ukraine, it's still not enough. Russian bases from which they launch attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure remain safe within Russian territory. Meanwhile, Russia is free to amass forces in border regions such as Kharkiv Oblast, without fear of retaliation from Ukraine due to the restrictions it is still facing. Domestically produced FPV drones can be useful tools in warfare, but they cannot create strategic breakthroughs on their own. Ukraine's existing weapons, such as tanks and missiles provided by the West, seem to be underutilized while Russia continues to build up its forces. To achieve victory, Ukraine needs to act decisively rather than waiting for Russia to bring them to the negotiating table. The counteroffensive against Russia has helped Ukraine shift the dynamics and gain some critical advantages. First, it has boosted the morale of both the Ukrainian military and the population, who had been under pressure from having to defend against Russia's overwhelming power. While the Ukrainian army has inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy, allowing Russia to remain on the offensive has dampened the nation's spirit, especially as attacks on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure continue. The counteroffensive not only lifted domestic morale, but also encouraged greater support from Western partners, leading to a loosening of restrictions on military aid. A prime example is Ukraine's drone attack in the summer of 2023, which destroyed a Russian Su-57 at the Akhtybinsk Air Base, nearly 400 miles from Ukraine's border. This fighter jet, which Russia had previously kept well protected by not deploying it in Ukrainian airspace, was severely damaged. This victory not only boosted Ukraine's morale, but also reminded Western nations of the potential of the weapons they are supplying to Kyiv. Ukraine hopes this demonstrates that Putin's nuclear threats are merely bluffs. Ukraine believes that by attacking Russia, they can persuade Western partners to loosen restrictions on weapons and increase financial support. The counteroffensive is not just a military move, but a strategic step to demonstrate the ability to reclaim territory and convince the West that Ukraine is worth investing in. Ukraine needs aid to sustain both its economy and its military, but divisions within the West about Ukraine's prospects for victory have led to inconsistent support. This attack is also aimed at changing the West's perception, pulling them away from hesitation and showing that with enough support, Ukraine can still make progress. Meanwhile, Russia needs the West to remain hesitant and divided to maintain hope for its own victory. By launching this offensive, Ukraine forces Putin to respond and pushes the West into the fray. The counteroffensive not only shifts the battlefield, but also serves as a way for Ukraine to convince its allies that with strong enough support, they can win. So will this lead to deeper attacks into Russia, closer to Moscow? We'll have to wait and see. Remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss the latest military analyses.